name is David Tate, and I'm a member of the Encore Learning Special Events Committee, which works to organize and develop these presentations. If you're a member of Encore Learning, I would encourage you to either volunteer to help us out with this, or there's also many other volunteer opportunities within Encore Learning. It is an organization that is primarily run by their volunteers and its members. If you're not a member, consider joining Encore Learning. You can learn more about the organization by going to www.encorelearning.net. That's .net. So today we have, I think, a very interesting presentation. We have with us Dr. Winterton, who is with NASA, more specifically with Wallops, which is a NASA facility, very near, well, not so, fairly close to us, a few hours away. And so we will get into introductions in just a minute. Before we...
Kenny, I work with David on the special events team. I think I know many of you probably on this webinar. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm particularly pleased to introduce this presentation. We had a little bit of a rehearsal the other day, and it will be extremely interesting. And things I think that you'll learn about NASA, that certainly I did, and things I didn't know. Our presentation will be led by Dr. Joyce Winterton. And I asked Dr. Winterton how she'd like to be introduced, and she said, well, I'm basically a teacher and an educator at heart. So she said, I really came up the ranks of education from a high school teacher, and then I progressed on, I was on the U.S. Senate Committee for Education. She worked for the Department of Education. She worked for USA Today in education. And for the past 15 years, she's been involved with NASA in education generally and communication, but she's extremely knowledgeable about the scope and the operation of NASA, and then the individual divisions within NASA, including Wallops, which is not too far from here. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Winterton, and we'll learn more about NASA. Thank you.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Winterton.
Thank you very much. I'm excited about this opportunity to talk a little bit more about NASA's missions and some maybe things you're not aware of. So my background, as was said, was education. So my main job at NASA is to get that next generation of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians, and to show students a real world application of STEM and how they can apply it when they are in their career. So there have been a lot of additional bonuses to working for NASA that I wasn't aware of. So in the upper right corner that was on the advertisement is what I call the reduced gravity flight. Some refer to it as a vomit comet. I prefer not to do that. I actually did 2 of those flights. You do 20 parabolas, and you're actually weightless for a few minutes as you climb. And then as you reduce, you've got to be back on the ground. As a scuba diver, I thought, well, that'll be just like being neutrally buoyant. You'll just float. Oh no, it's a lot more difficult to control your body in reduced gravity. So if you ever look at NASA TV, you can access that through the website. The astronauts look like they're just hovering. Usually their feet are hooked under some apparatus to keep them from floating away. But it was a great experience, and I certainly would do that again. Below that photo, yes, in fact, that is Queen Elizabeth. She wanted to visit a NASA facility. And when I worked at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., I did have a chance to escort her for 20 minutes and talk to her about what students were doing to learn about Hubble telescope images. And she was lovely, just like escorting your grandmother. So that was a real bonus. If you don't recognize the person below, that's astronaut Neil Armstrong. And what an honor to meet him. Such a humble person, and just felt he did his job. I did experience 18 space shuttle launches, and that's the one to the left. One thing we have at NASA are space grants, and I was in Puerto Rico, and that's the top of Arecibo, which really I value now because a heavy storm just collapsed Arecibo recently, and that's one of the telescopes we were looking into deep space. The next photo to the left is one of our sounding rocket launches where we have students, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the next one is our Antares launches. So I'll give you more information about that. But first, I am an educator, so you have to have a quiz. This is a pre-test and it is self-scored. So either if you want to type it down, write it, or remember. We'll go through to the quiz now. First question, how many NASA centers and facilities are there? Even when I started to work for NASA, people said, oh, you're going to be at Kennedy Space Center. I was like, no. Oh, then you must be at Johnson Space Center in Houston. No, I was actually working for NASA headquarters, which I said is in Washington, D.C. So just so you know, there are actually 10 centers and 7 facilities. Now we do count JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is actually part of the university. So it's a little different, but we all do different work and we collaborate. So again, NASA has a lot of places for future workforce to work. Next question, name the 3 astronauts on Apollo 11. I hope all of you know that one, but just in case you don't. Neil Armstrong, of course, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. A lot of people forget Michael Collins because he was the one who stayed in the spacecraft to make sure they would be able to leave the moon. I was giving a presentation in New Hampshire and I asked the teachers that question and one person had it just so quickly. I was a little bit surprised. He came up afterwards and said, would you like to know why I knew so quickly that Michael Collins was one? And I said, yes, I would. He said he and his college roommate were at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and they were looking at some Apollo artifacts. And his friend said, what about that dumb schmuck who didn't even get to walk on the moon? They heard the voice behind him say, well, without that dumb schmuck, they would not have gone off the moon. It was Michael Collins. He was actually the head of the Air and Space Museum at the time. So the moral of the story, every job is important and never underestimate who might be listening. He actually gave them a lovely tour of the Air and Space Museum, but good lesson to remember. Next question, how many international partners support the ISS or the International Space Station? And I'll talk a little bit more about the ISS, but it's an amazing feat of engineering where different countries helped compile it, manufacture it, but put it together in space. So there are actually 15 countries that support the International Space Station. I hope you're being honest on your scoring. What is the Space Grant Consortium? Well, if you don't know that, you do need to know it. NASA funds a space grant consortium in every state in the United States, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. So it's usually led by one university or institution, and then universities and colleges across the state collaborate. So NASA has a spot in every state, not just our 10 centers. So hopefully you'll connect if you want to learn more about the space grant in your state. Of course, is there a place in Virginia where rockets are launched? Yes, there is, and it's here at Wallops Flight Facility. Of course, the next test, could you find it on a map? The last question is, what is NASA's most exciting launch? Well, the correct answer is anything you list. NASA does a lot of exciting work, so whether you think it's been a space shuttle or you've been one of our launches or back to Apollo, I think it's really what you find most exciting and gets you motivated about learning about NASA. NASA just has numerous missions. We just have one mission that's returning from the asteroid Bennu that has collected rocks and will come back to Earth with those samples in 2023. We look at our sun, our solar system, our Earth. So this gives you an idea of just some of the current missions that are already flying with our satellites, but also some that are planned. So a lot always to learn about NASA. It's never boring to work here. NASA Wallops Flight Facility is part of Goddard Space Flight Center, which is in Greenbelt, Maryland. And you see that through Goddard, we support earth science, heliophysics, planetary, astrophysics, human exploration, our suborbital launches and platforms I'll talk a little bit more about here at Wallops, space communications, and cross-cutting technologies. So it's an exciting place to work and always something very revolutionary that we're doing at Goddard and at Wallops. So Wallace basically goes to where the science is. The scientists decide where they want to go. This shows our different platforms that I'll talk a little bit about, and our science collection that we do. And you get a little bit of sense on how high those different platforms go. You see where the International Space Station is. Yes, some of even our sounding rockets go higher than the International Space Station. So Wallops Flight Facility is on the eastern shore of Virginia. So we're just south of Maryland, Ocean City, and south of Delaware. So perfect place to launch different vehicles that are suborbital and orbital, because we're launching over the Atlantic Ocean. Down on the bottom, you can see Bermuda. That's also an important site for us that I'll mention in a few minutes. So Wallops, compared to other centers like Kennedy Johnson, is fairly small. We only have about 285 civil servants and about 865 contractors. We also have a facility where we actually have tenants. So the US Navy has a place here, NOAA, Virginia Space Flight Authority, Rocket Lab, and also the Coast Guard. The amount of money we generate for this region is pretty significant. As you can see, 1.2 billion in assets generates a lot of jobs and about 1.37 billion. So it's an important investment for NASA, for Virginia, and for the country. NASA has Wallops has a very long history. Wallops actually started as a military base back in World War II. We actually started with supersonic air flight tests, and actually did some testing with rhesus monkey for human space flight, and then transitioned to science and technology missions. Also in the 1970s, they launched, I think, like 7 sounding rockets to look at what was happening with the solar eclipse at that time. So I'm going to play this video about Wallops. So I'm going to go into some more specifics of what you saw in the video. So we have a main base, and you'll see we have a L-shaped runway. So we do aircraft missions and different work with the military. Right now we have a flight landing practice where new Navy pilots that will take supplies and sailors out to aircraft carriers are doing touch and goes. So they have to do a number of those, a certain number at a certain grade, before they're actually allowed to land on an aircraft carrier. So if you happen to hear any aircraft in the background while I'm talking, that's our new Navy pilots practicing how to take off and land. We also have our launch island. You see it's basically right on the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a great place to provide our launch opportunities. And we do really, it's not a main area where we do other visitors, but it's certainly important to our launch capabilities. So again, this is the overview. We are a national asset and we provide space access to NASA, Department of Defense, and also our commercial partners. So for instance, with our sounding rockets, those are suborbital, which means they go up and they come back down. In the lower right corner, you see the Aurora Borealis. We're actually launching into that in Poker Flat, Alaska, which is north of Anchorage, to better understand solar flares and how they interfere with our commercial and our satellites and our communication systems. I'll talk a little bit about our scientific balloons. We have airborne science. We do small satellites. We have a very active research range. We do earth science, which really is important. And then we also do our STEM education, which I'll explain a little more about. So this is a map of where we've gone in the world. As I said, the scientists decide where they want to go, and we've been everywhere from Norway, Sweden, the Marshall Islands, Australia, New Zealand. So a pretty active opportunity to travel with our missions. So the suborbital carriers, we have 3 primary carriers. With our sounding rockets, we have 16 different vehicles. And as you see, they'll go up to 60 to 900 miles and for a short duration up to 30 minutes. So it really depends on how high the scientists need to go with their missions, and we also do student ones. With the balloons, we'll launch those at several places around the world. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And as you can see, they'll go to 160,000 feet, and they're a longer duration. We've had them up to 100 days aloft collecting science for the payloads that they have. And then also our aircraft do fly missions around the world. We fly more missions for NASA with our aircraft and science missions than any other location at NASA. Our sounding rockets are pretty interesting because researchers, we help them build their payloads, test it, and then we fly their instruments. Here at Wallops, when we launch those, they are retrieved from the ocean. Even when we have our student missions, they're returned, and then we give them their payloads back so they can analyze their data. It's a low cost, quicker turnaround, a lot of technology that might later be used on satellites launches from either a sounding rocket or a balloon, because it's less expensive to correct errors when it's in a suborbital launch rather than going right to the satellite, and then they have to fix the instrument. With the balloon program, again, it's lower cost, quicker turnaround, and it's a great way to access space for a number of different missions. We've launched from Antarctica, from Sweden, from New Zealand, and Australia. So again, it's looking at where we can safely launch such a large balloon. When these balloons are aloft, they're the size of a football stadium. So they're very large, and their payloads that you can see there can be up to 8,000 pounds or plus, kind of the size of a small car. We do retrieve the payloads so they can be reused. And again, it's very exciting to do. I actually have this video that you'll see how the balloon operates. So it's being filled with helium, and when the air conditions and the winds are just right, then they release it. It has to be totally over the payload, and then they'll release the payload. You'll see the little orange part of the line. That's actually the parachute. So when they're finished collecting the science, they send a report to the balloon to tear and release, and then the parachute will inflate and safely land the payload, and we'll retrieve it. So these go right to the edge of space, so you can do some great astrophysics. You can see the solar panel on that particular payload that's being launched. So as it gets higher into the atmosphere, that helium will inflate, and then it becomes a very, very large scientific data collection vehicle. Our aircraft also does a number of different researches. There in the lower left, that's actually an autonomous vehicle that actually has a capability of going to Africa and coming back without a pilot. It's all electronically controlled from the ground. The parachute you can see is a fairly recent test we've done. This is actually a test on the parachute that will be used to help land astronauts as they're going back to the moon. So it's important to test every aspect of a NASA mission. So you'll see how it actually, one parachute becomes 3 and would safely land the astronauts in a water landing. So we're doing several of those tests. Most of our aircraft were previous military aircraft like a P-3 or a C-130 that are great for these long duration missions and be able to adapt them as scientists have different payloads that they want to put on that aircraft. And then of course we do unmanned vehicle testing as well. This is an example of our P-3 that did research called Operation Ice Bridge for a number of years in Greenland. So they're actually flying the same pattern year over year to look at any change in the ice shelf. And this data is supporting and consistent with our Landsat satellites that are collecting this data as well. The larger plane is a C-130. It's flown missions as far as the Philippines. And then you see just a different type of an unmanned aircraft system in the lower right corner. Hopefully I didn't make any of you seasick watching that plane. Our range capabilities, you can see the research range. That's where they actually will control the launch. The picture to the left is our tracking site, which we need for our larger launches in Bermuda. So if you see that beautiful blue water, that is in Bermuda. And we have teams that will be shipping down there fairly soon for our next Antares launch. So we have a number of scientists who've used our platforms from NASA, from other agencies, internationally, colleges and universities. The building in the middle is a fairly new one that we've actually constructed. So we have a larger facility during launches for our partners to have a place to look at all of their data and their computer screens. And then of course, the importance of tracking that Antares, which is, I could ask you a question, how many astronauts are on the Antares? Well, the answer is none. It's a resupply mission. It's not a human mission to the International Space Station. We also are doing a lot more of small satellites and special projects. As NASA is trying to collect more data, more cost effective, they're tending to use these small satellites that are amazing with how much data they can collect. You see the HaloSat there, the one that's a cube RRT. So getting pretty sophisticated with the data that can be collected. Some are launched from the International Space Stations, others might be launched on other rockets, but we help the scientists in getting those ready for the launch. We actually have a Wallops ground station that will track them as well. And there are licenses you need from the FCC and others, and so we help them do that. NASA actually has a CubeSat space launch initiative they work with as they're trying to schedule the number of different small sats and CubeSats on different launch opportunities and vehicles. Wallops is very blessed to have the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, or MARS. So this Commonwealth of Virginia stood up the Virginia Space Flight Authority and have worked with NASA. So they have developed and built the pads. So it's a collaboration when we launch Minotaur rockets, the resupply to the International Space Station. They've actually developed recently an unmanned aircraft runway on Wallops Island to test both for private sector and the military all of the new unmanned aircraft systems of different sizes that are being formed. And so we actually have a processing facility that's new that you can see on the bottom. So it's a great partnership, and Virginia has a really strong investment and partnership with NASA that we're very proud of. So the resupply to International Space Station is pretty amazing. So astronauts love to have that resupply from, whether it's from Northrop Grumman, which has the Antares, or SpaceX. Also, there are resupplies from Russia and Japan that go to the International Space Station. That's a great photo of the International Space Station as it currently is. It's about the size of a football field. And there are different segments and sections, and you'll see the solar panels and different places where the resupply missions dock to provide that information. I was surprised, one of the astronauts who was speaking to our students said the one thing that he really enjoyed about the Cygnus, which is the cargo part of Antares, is the fresh air, a sense of fresh air from Earth, because you don't open windows on the International Space Station. So, and just some of the fresh vegetables and food that we can send up in addition to what their rehydrated food that they're used to. One of the new partners Wallops is working with is Rocket Lab. They're a US-based company, but they have been launching in New Zealand, and they selected Wallops Flight Facility as their next launch facility. And so these are smaller rockets that will be launched more frequently. They actually were just awarded funding to take one of their payloads, a small sat, to the moon. So we'll start launching these rockets from Wallops probably in 2021 and continue in the future. So that's an exciting, the launch pad's ready for them. Some of the technical aspects are being finalized as well. So we have a number of very successful missions that we continue to launch. The NG-15, or that's Northrop Grumman, launch was in February 20th of this year, and it takes 8,000 pounds of cargo. So as you can imagine, it's pretty well packed into the Cygnus, which carries it, and the astronauts have to unload it once it arrives and docks at the International Space Station. The good news is, since they're weightless environment, it's not very heavy. They can actually just throw it into the cargo hold from the space station. And then also, we just launched a Minotaur for the Naval Reconnaissance Orbital Company, part of the government, as part of the United Air Force. So that was very successful, and it carried several satellites that the National Reconnaissance Office will be using. We do a lot in STEM education. I won't go to all of these, but whether it's middle school, high school students, undergraduate students, college faculty, high school teachers, we use our missions to give them a hands-on experience of what it's like to work for NASA and why you need to know physics and why you need to know science and mathematics. So it's very exciting to have students. We've been doing everything virtually since COVID. Even our internships currently are virtual, but we're looking forward to having students back on base. The community college program that's going on this week has 187 community college students from across the United States that are learning about NASA, and they plan a mission and they get judged on their thoughtfulness of presenting and planning that fictitious mission. So a lot of great ways to motivate students, and we like to have them involved in a number of different opportunities through their education into their career. Our internships, I want to make sure you've got that website, intern.nasa.gov. We use the same website for all of our 10 centers and our facilities for undergraduate students to apply. There are also a few opportunities for graduate and international students as well. So you can go to that website. As you see, for our undergraduate education interns, they need to be US citizens. They need to have a 3.0 GPA. They need to be enrolled full-time in an accredited university or community college, and they are paid internships. So we like to make sure the interns get that sense of how to manage their funding as their interns. And it's pretty broad. We have them in business. We have them in each of our launch areas. We have them in education, communications, and with our visitor center. So would really encourage students to look at that and think about applying to a NASA internship. We also do student flight research opportunities. So again, the closer we can get students to experiencing what it's like to be a scientist, whether it's rocket scientist or an earth scientist, we like to do that. And these are some photos of our students. The top left is actually a CubeSat that was developed by students that flew to the International Space Station and was released from there, and the students get their data. We also have student experiments that go on our sounding rockets, our balloons, and also our handheld balloons. That's what you see in the lower left, right corner where you see the students. So two of our longest running programs are our Rock On series. To the right, you see that's where students are actually here at Wallops. Usually it's about 100 undergraduate students, including community college students, and students from tribal colleges as well as historical Black colleges are very active involved. And we work with both the Colorado and Virginia space grants to put on that workshop. They build a standard payload, test it, and you can see the container there that they stack their payloads in. They integrate it into the sounding rocket you see to the right, and then down below, that's one of the launches. And you can see the nice thing about a sounding rocket launch, you can get pretty close, and so it's pretty exciting. You can actually hear the first stage hit the Atlantic Ocean if the breezes are just right. And as I said before, we retrieve their payloads and the sounding rocket from the ocean, bring it back, and they get to disintegrate it and get their data from their disks that they built. We also do one that's a high altitude student platform. Currently, we have 11 universities that are involved this year, and they're building their payloads. They'll take them to Palestine, Texas in the next couple of weeks to integrate and put it on that payload that's going to be launching in September from Fort Sumner, New Mexico. So it's going to fly to the edge of space, it'll come back, and they will get their data again. I wanted to give you just an example of how Wallops partners with other locations on important missions. So JPL, which is in California, came to Wallops and said, we need to test a parachute. So we used our balloon, our rocket experience with our sounding rockets, and tested that in Maui, Hawaii. So we used that zero pressure balloon, and that was called an LDSD test. So you can kind of see from both tests in June on the 28th in 2014 and the 8th in 2015, so 2 years in a row, that parachute didn't test so well. We got to the altitude and the speed to simulate what it would be like to land on Mars, but needed to go back to the drawing board. So subsequently in 2017, they had redesigned the parachute. We used one of our larger sounding rockets, the Black Brand, and launched it from Wallops 3 different times. And this time, the parachute worked much better. And so after redesigning it, this parachute helped land Perseverance on Mars. So if you've watched any of the video or the real-time coverage of Perseverance landing on Mars in February of this year, you'll recognize that parachute. So basically, this is the engineering design process that NASA uses. They ask, what do we need to research? What do we need to find out? We want to know more about Mars. What could we do to land on Mars with some different instruments that we haven't done before with our other rovers? Make a plan, create it, and then you test. And then you go back to the drawing board as you saw, and then you improve it. And as a result, you see the creativity and problem solving with Perseverance on Mars. And if you're familiar, Ingenuity is the helicopter that went up, and they're flying the helicopter to get images and data from locations that the rover can't go. So exciting mission that's going to continue for several years and help us learn more about Mars. One of the exciting missions you really don't want to miss this launch, because you can watch it on NASA TV, and I'm sure it'll be covered on major TV networks, is the James Webb Telescope. So it's going to observe parts of deep space that we've never seen before. And it has an infrared telescope. So it will be able to even see clearer than the Hubble telescope is currently doing now. And it's a great collaboration with NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. So James Webb is going to be 1 million miles from Earth when it starts collecting its images. And it's quite interesting because both the mirrors and the sun shield unfold a lot like Japanese origami. So they've learned a lot. It's going to be an exciting mission. And the goal right now is to launch it from French Guiana in November of this year. So again, as part of our collaboration, European Space Agency launches from that area. So can't wait to see those images. I mean, just what we've learned from Hubble is just so fascinating, and to know that we're even going to have clearer images of solar systems, planets that might be able to sustain life is going to be exciting to watch that mission. And that one is led by Goddard Space Flight Center. Also, NASA has plans to go back to the moon and then Mars. There's a lot we need to learn still about radiation and long-term stays. So we're actually going to, through our Artemis program, put women and men on the moon and actually create a settlement. And that will give us a chance to research more before we go on that very, very long trip to Mars. And we do have return trips planned, both to the moon and Mars. So that's going to be a major initiative for NASA for a number of years. It's pretty exciting to know about that, and hope you'll follow that. So we have some exciting upcoming missions. Already here in July, we've had, as I mentioned, the Navy's practicing here. That's a SCLLP. We have another commercial airdrop testing from the aircraft, and that those parachutes is going to occur in the next week or two. We have sounding rocket program missions that are currently going at, that's White Sands Missile Range. As well as in August, we also have a student launch, the RockSat-X, that's going to be launching here around the 15th. Also in August, our Antares next launch, NG-16, is either going to be the 9th or the 10th. Right now it's scheduled for the 10th, about 5:55 in the afternoon. That rocket is so large, you will be able to see it along the East Coast. We've had some amazing photos, even from DC and New York and Florida. So that's a great one to watch. And as I mentioned, that RockSat-X will launch on the 19th. So that's my presentations. I want to make sure you see those two websites. You can always know about some of the latest things we're doing on nasa.gov, and you can access NASA TV from there as well. And then you see the website for our Wallops facility as well. So I think we can have questions now.
Very much for your presentation. This is kind of the second time I've gone through it, and there's so much information. It's like a fire hose coming at you. But as you gave us some good sources, and I told you earlier that we are planning to see the launch on August 10th. So we're excited. I've never seen a launch live, so thank you. So there were a number of questions, very interesting questions. So let me get to the questions, and I'm really going to go in order. Lynn has a number of questions, but they're kind of around a theme of climate change. So I'll run through them and in order, really. How has the sea level rise caused by how has the sea level rise caused by climate change impacted the Wallops program and the facility there?
Well, certainly one thing that we continually have to do, from the very first picture, you could see the Atlantic Ocean is right by our launch facilities. And we actually have brought sand in from further out in the ocean to make sure we have a beach that protects us. So I must admit, Mother Nature tends to be a little bit in charge. So every hurricane or nor'easter, we battle a little bit with keeping that. But certainly maintaining those launch facilities on the Wallops Island is something that's very important. And you know, the impact of rising sea level, but also more severe storms is something we really work with the agency to protect, and it's really our priority to keep those available.
Does the Wallops facility consider the environmental impact of their projects in regards to pollution and climate change? Is that a factor?
Oh, absolutely. We have an office that's totally dedicated to environmental issues and making sure that as we launch, not only people, but our environment is safe. So that is something we continue to look at. And it's a great career opportunity for young people because that is a priority. So they're constantly working with our leadership and our scientists to make sure that we can minimize any environmental impact. So great question. Thank you.
What are the demographics of the people affiliated with NASA projects? And are there a number of women and minorities? Are they increasing as time goes on?
Yes, they are. We do have a number of women and minorities that are in senior leadership positions, but as I just did a presentation at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which is a historical Black college, it's never enough. We really are having very active projects across NASA to increase women PIs, scientists who are from minorities or underrepresented students. And we do, MUREP is a funding source that Congress has set up, as well as EPSCoR, that specifically target not only minorities, but women and also rural areas as well. So very important to us, and anything we can do. That's why we really like to do these student initiatives, because we want them to experience success. We actually had with our Rock-On students a couple of years ago, a female who was from a tribal college, and my colleagues saw her outside the workshop and she was in tears. Oh, this isn't good. So she talked to her and said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "I didn't think I could do it, but I can."
Wow.
And so that's one of our priorities, is to get students, young people, adults who don't think they can, to experience, yes, they can. I'm from an extremely rural area. My grandson actually won a bet because his friend said, "Oh, I bet you your grandmother doesn't work for NASA." So it really is important, and you'll see the number of programs across NASA that are really trying to reach out to underrepresented students and current leaders.
Great. What are some of the recent examples of research done for space programs that have produced benefits for Earth people, Earthlings?
Oh, there are a number of those. And actually, you can go on the NASA website to research more because there are really numerous, just some of the smaller tools that our astronauts have to use. One of the things, I don't think NASA invented Velcro, but we certainly perfected the use of it, because both on the International Space Station or when they're doing spacewalks, you have to keep track of your tools and they'll float off. So the smaller tools that could be used with that are in a very different environment are some things that have been applied here. Some of the things that we're doing with conserving water and using water is also being, I'm not offering, they do have a technology that allows every bit of water on the International Space Station to be purified and reused. That does include urine. So just a number of things that we're always happy to work with companies that take one of our ideas and want to make it into the private sector and apply it. So go on to the website and you can see the number of things. That could be another 2-hour lecture.
Can anyone come to Wallops and do a tour, watch a launch, or do a tour? Do you have public facilities there? And then specifically, maybe you could talk about what we talked about earlier about seeing the August 9th or 10th launch, where to go and how to do that.
Wallops has a visitor center that in normal times, so hopefully we'll get back to that soon, that is open to the public. And they have great exhibits. They can actually, for groups up to 20, they can schedule tours. Those are somewhat limited, but you can schedule through the Wallops Visitor Center. You can find that on the website that I gave you the link to. Because we're so close to Wallops, Chincoteague Island is a great place. A lot of my colleagues live in Ocean City. They can see the launches excellently from there. So there are a number of places. For the Antares launch on August 10th, NASA is working with the city of Chincoteague and Robert Reed Park, which is in the main part of town. We're actually going to be having a large screen and docents that will help explain about the mission. So there are a number of places for the public to view those.
Are there any issues for Wallops now from the sea level rise, and what are the concerns for the next 30 to 50 years?
As I mentioned, our launch facilities, but that's part of the reason we have a number of science missions that are collecting data, and also our satellites, about the impact of sea level rise and climate change. So NASA tends to collect the data and then give it to other experts and other scientists to analyze it. But you know, if you live on an island like I do, I live on Chincoteague most of the time, you see the impact. I have a better appreciation of a high tide and a mega moon, and how that impacts the amount of ocean that's pushed onto a barrier island. So it's something that we know we want to be part of collecting data. It's a real priority right now within the agency. And I think we'll be looking at additional science missions to provide information and data that can be analyzed and used to better protect not only Wallops, but every place along the coastal areas.
Are all facilities along water? My question. I mean, is that all of them along oceans or big bad?
Yeah, so Wallops is the only launch facility that's actually owned and operated by NASA. So we decide who launches when. There are other launch facilities that we use that are along coastal areas. So Kennedy Space Center is operated by the Cape Canaveral when they launch there. So that's military. Vandenberg in California is another launch facility. And there's also one in Kodiak, Alaska. So it really depends on where you need to launch and when. And then, as I mentioned before, there are other space agencies from other countries that have launch facilities as well.
But a requirement is to be along a mass of water, and that's a requirement?
If you're launching a rocket, again, NASA's priority is safety of our personnel and the public. So the fact that you're not launching over a large population area, even with our scientific balloons, we will launch those over rural areas where we know we won't do any impact if there's an issue with the balloon.
Are there any positions filled by political appointees at Wallops or Goddard, or and is that much of an effect on the work, on your work? If so, how does that affect when administrations change?
Yes, there are leadership positions that are appointed by whoever the administration is and the new president. Compared to other federal agencies, NASA has a pretty small number of those. So our headquarters, our administrator, our deputy, head of our communications, those are all appointed and approved by Congress, and then in turn the administrator selects who are head of the NASA centers.
Well, I think you answered part of this, but the question is, do you have programs for younger space enthusiasts? I don't know what they mean by younger, but it seems like you have a span of programs.
Yes, I can still consider myself younger. Yes, we do. Last week, we actually, Linda Sherman, who's my colleague, who's on the call as well, we did what we call a launch forum, and we invited elementary students who were involved in summer camps here along the Eastern Shore, but also we had 3 summer camps in Bermuda, because part of our agreement with the Bermuda government to have our tracking station there is we help support their education. So 3 years ago, we did a space camp in Bermuda, and we're doing some virtual activities and a virtual tour with them as well. So, and the NASA website has a lot of resources that you can use as even a homeschooler or as a parent to motivate students. And we like to, what we say, a continuum. So next week, we'll have 40 high school sophomores from Virginia who are doing a virtual experience about NASA and Wallops. Normally, they would be here at Wallops for a week. So hopefully next year we'll have them back. But yes, a lot of activities, not only at Wallops, but across NASA.
Okay. And it sounds like an obvious question, but how, with all the satellites out there, how do they prevent each other from crashing into each other? I mean,
well, that's a good question and important one, as well as there's space debris. So There is an agency that tracks those very specifically to make sure our astronauts in the International Space Station, if they think a debris is coming close to them, either they can push the International Space Station up in a slightly different orbit, or they actually get into the Soyuz spacecraft. Worst case, they had to leave the International Space Station. So that is something that we monitor closely, where those satellites are, keeping them apart and keeping them safe. But if you want to be a millionaire, that might be a good job to go into, so how to retrieve some of the debris that, you know, not just US, but other countries and create.
Is there a lot of debris in space? I mean, you kind of hear that anecdotally, but is there a lot of debris?
There is some. I don't know that I can give a quantity. So a lot of the debris you'll hear when it comes back towards Earth, it burns up. But if there's an issue with a satellite that for some reason blew apart, there is debris. Space is large, but that is something we watch very carefully. And you actually, when you launch a satellite, NASA requires that you have a plan on how you're either going to deorbit it or take care of it when its life is finished.
And also, Joyce, David Tate has a question he'd like to ask you live. David?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, and we just to the audience, we still have time for more questions if you want to submit them through the Q&A, but I'll just invoke moderator privilege here and give one directly to Dr. Winterton. So, you know, when I was looking into the James Webb Telescope, which is a fascinating project, and, you know, they're putting it into Lagrange Point, which maybe I missed that in my science, my high school science class, but it's a fascinating concept. So maybe you can, another quiz here, give people an explanation of the Lagrange Point and how they're using that to stabilize the James Webb Telescope out in space.
Yeah, now you're getting into a technical area, and Linda, feel free to add if you want to. So, you know, the James Webb has been in development for years and years and testing, and so it's really being positioned in space so it can best look into deep space. And I mentioned the infrared will allow it to see through some of the fog, as we would call it, into those solar system. Linda, can you add anything about the Lagrange Point? I'll research and get that back to you, David. Linda, feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, I was trying to find out where to do that. The Lagrange points are points in space where there's two large bodies of, you know, large masses, planets or moons, that having it in those locations would create a stable orbit for whatever's going in there. So the satellite or the Webb telescope will go to a Lagrange point. Which one? There are multiples out there. It's not just a single one. I'm not sure which one it will be tracking. I haven't looked into that, but that's what they are.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah, that's our science learning for the afternoon, I guess. But we do have another question that just came in. Are there any plans to expand the ISS to build space vehicles in space in the future? Space vehicles. Well, I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not sure whether space vehicles do you use on Mars or just to do a spacewalk. But yeah, I guess what plans do they have for ISS in terms of expansion? I didn't realize it was a whole football field long. That's a big. Is that the interior, or does that include the panels and whatnot that stick out?
That would include the panels. Ricky Arnold, an astronaut who recently did a presentation, the students said it's kind of like the size of a 5-bedroom home. So, okay. You know, and we built that out. So the International Space Station is doing some really important research, medical research. They're trying to grow plants that they could eat as they, you know, were going to the moon or Mars, and how would that happen? Research on how that long stay in a weightless environment impacts you. If you've probably looked at any of the videos with the International Space Station, they're doing a lot of exercise to keep their body and their muscles from deteriorating when they're in weightless, because they don't stand, they just float. There's not a top or a bottom. So the plans are to maintain the International Space Station for a number of years to do that research. Building vehicles will not occur at the International Space Station, but one of the things we're very excited about at NASA is the more commercial companies that can support the resupply, or like SpaceX is doing astronauts to the International Space Station. That allows us to take our time and our resources to develop more space vehicles and launch vehicles that will take us to the moon and back to Mars. And I don't know about you, but I was pretty excited about the Virgin 1 launcher recently and the Blue Origin that are private ventures. It's a short stay in space, but I love my reduced gravity so much that if I had $200,000 that I didn't know what to do with, I'd get on the list to fly with Virgin 1 or also Blue Origin, which is the Amazon one. So, and there are a number of other companies that are developing rockets for space tourism as well.
Yeah, so you are an astronaut, having gone to space, right?
Well, I wasn't truly in space. I wasn't even in low Earth orbit. I was just high in an airplane.
Oh, okay. But now, so the ones that are going on the private missions, they're at least claiming to be astronauts. Is that accurate?
So they're going high enough that they are experiencing the weightlessness as an astronaut would. With the flights that I did, it's a parabolic airplane. So you get the weightlessness because you're dropping so fast. Whereas both the Virgin 1 launcher and Blue Origin are actually high enough that you're experiencing weightlessness as an astronaut would, but they're just not staying up there very long.
Okay. Do you think once that gets going and a lot of the public become astronauts, that it diminishes the very select list that exists now in terms of people that are astronauts?
Well, I think there will be people who will experience astronaut-like experience, but to be, a long-term astronaut, that takes a lot of training and experience. And, when you watch the astronauts who actually do repairs and build things on the International Space Station, you have a real appreciation of what it's like to be floating and see the Earth. But, so I think hopefully it will inspire the continue exploration, because I think great nations do explore. So,
yeah. Now, it's interesting. Go ahead, Louise.
The hope, I think everybody would love to experience weightlessness. I mean, it's just a kind of a natural curiosity. The astronauts, whether they're commercial or ultimately, go into space for multiple day missions, they must practice, or there must be a simulation training program that they go through. Yes. And will that eventually, do you think, be a commercial enterprise just for people to experience weightlessness on Earth?
Well, certainly the astronauts do, at least a year of very intense training. They actually, at Johnson Space Center, we have a simulation of the International Space Station. So when they're doing spacewalks, they're actually trying to simulate that experience underwater. So there are a number of different simulators to try and get people, really knowledgeable. When they get to space, and when they actually have to, even like when they were repairing the Hubble telescope, they rehearse that. Now there's always maybe some troubleshooting that we didn't prepare them for, but they work in their team to make that happen. I do think, that experience of wanting to be weightless, I can't help but think that down the road, there will be opportunities to train like an astronaut and understand what it takes, and more opportunities for commercial ventures to do that. It's pretty competitive. Actually, it was surprising. Most astronauts do not get into the astronaut corps the first time they apply. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 times. So if you have that goal, there's an opportunity to make that happen.
How about the woman that just went up with, she's 83. She didn't make it the first time, and never give up. Never, 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 right?
Exactly. I love seeing that. That was wonderful.
Oh my goodness. I think everybody
and she said she'd go back right away if she could.
Yeah. So David, did you have another question?
Well, I mean, we do have, you know, as many times happens with the audience that we have, they're able to provide some additional information on our topic. And here someone has indicated that Department of Defense Space Surveillance Network tracks discrete objects as small as 2 inches in diameter in low Earth orbit and about 1 yard in geosynchronous orbit. Currently, about 27,000 officially cataloged objects are still in orbit, and most of them are 10 centimeters or larger. I guess there's a place you can actually go a website or go to NASA and get information on that. But anyway, so yeah, that's just information added to our question. And also, someone, a couple people, or okay, so someone says James is. Couple questions on James Webb Telescope. Was it named after a former senator from Virginia? I don't think so. It's James Webb, but maybe you can fill us in on that. And also, is it going to be used to search for exoplanets? Which I think you indicated, kind of hinted that maybe it will be used for that.
Yes, definitely will be searching for exoplanet, and James Webb was an early leader within NASA. So that's where the name came from. And thanks for that additional information about tracking. One point that I want to make, which you reinforced, is one thing that we do at NASA is work in teams. But also we work across teams. And you have to have trust in not only your team, but the other team. I'll give you a quick story. So I was in Poker Flat, Alaska, hoping to see a sounding rocket launch into the Aurora Borealis. Saw the aurora. It was fantastic. They came in and said, we think the conditions are going to be just right. We can launch all 4 sounding rockets tonight. I was thrilled, not only to see Aurora, but 4 sounding rocket launch. So it was 10 minutes before they were picking back up the count. And the FAA called and said, we have a live flight helicopter that needs to get to a remote village and they have to fly through your airspace.
Oh.
So you need to stand down. So that was the launch director who got that. She said, stand down. And so what did we do? We stood down. So that's something that even in our case studies we're doing with faculty and with students to give them examples of how NASA makes those tough decisions. You have to trust the team next to you or that's making a call. I was at one of our Antares launches and it was literally within the last 3 minutes. And there was one sensor that they didn't like what it said, so they called a halt. Now, it doesn't matter who guest is there. It could be the administrator, it could be the vice president. You still stand down when that expert says, not tonight.
Joyce, there's a question about how you became interested in space, kind of part A of the question. And then secondly, what do you think space travel is going to be like in 25 years? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, the reason I ended up choosing to come to NASA was that I was, as many people are concerned, the number of students that in the US are not choosing careers or even doing well in subjects in mathematics or science. And they really need to understand why those are great careers and very important. A lot of students don't know the exciting things you get to do as an engineer. And I thought, well, if NASA can't get students excited about STEM, who could? So that's part of the reason I came to NASA 15 years ago, to help our country get more students who are going to be our next generation of scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. You know, it's almost hard to predict. I know this will just shock you, but I remember the phone that was hooked to the wall and you actually had a party line. So you had to say, excuse me, could I get on the phone soon? So to think about what space travel could be, I mean, it would be so exciting. You know, it's interesting the number of advertisements and movies that are space-based these days, because I think there's just a hunger for that. So I would think in 25 years, it's going to be a lot easier to at least get to lower Earth orbit. Not sure we'll have a lot of people going back to Moon or to the Mars that are tourists, but I would think there'll be a lot of opportunities, just like we could, you know, fly the Concorde years ago and very, very quickly from the US to Europe. I think there are going to be new opportunities within the next 25 years for those of us who have a passion for flight. I'd definitely go to space if they called me and said. So I'm sitting right here by my phone just in case Administrator Nelson calls and say, we need a new astronaut. Come join us.
I hope you get there. So,
yes.
Well, Dr. Winterton, thank you so much for this. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of interest in among our members of Encore Learning, and then the general public, was open to the general public, your talk here. It is recorded if anybody'd like to share the link or look at it again. Again, thank you, thank you, thank you.
You are welcome, and thank you for all of those who participated. I'm just very impressed with Encore Learning and the session, so I'm going to start listening to the other ones as well. So thank you for the invitation. As you can tell, we just touched a little bit on what NASA's doing, so please stay tuned with the website and different news media so that your hunger for space and travel and understanding what NASA's about can be filled. So thank you for the invitation. Appreciated it.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening in and staying with us throughout the whole presentation and questions and answers. So see you in a couple of weeks for another presentation. Again, thank you.